Hi, it's Joey here. Today I'm going to be looking at J.K. Rowling's most recent tweets. I'm doing it a bit differently to how I normally do it. I'm going to be reacting as I read them. So hopefully it'll be good. Let's get into it. So first of all, I can see that she's retweeted a tweet of somebody saying that there's a rush to medicalise gay teens. The fact she's retweeted this suggests to me that she agrees with this idea, which to start with is I can't. So her first tweet in the series says that she's ignored porn tweets at children, but apparently calling her a transphobe is where it crosses the line. So she mentions about lying about hormone treatment and the views of trans women. I'm not quite sure what she's talking about here. Maybe I've missed something in the conversation, but I don't know what she's saying. I'm not sure why she thinks she's an authority on hormone treatment and what trans people think. She clearly isn't. In this tweet, she just talks about her own mental health issues in the past, which I can relate with, and I know they suck, so I don't really want to say much more about that. Yeah, it sucks. So she's saying here that there are many health professionals who are concerned about young people being shunted towards hormones and surgery. Once again, as I mentioned in my previous video, it's not easy to access these services. I can't see, from my own experience, there's no shunt towards these services. I've been waiting 3 years, over 3 years now, for an appointment at the gender identity clinic, and I've not got an appointment yet. So the idea that people are being shunted towards hormones and surgery, it's not the case. I've had hormones privately, but that's, you've got to know what you're talking about, and you've got to be sound of mind and understand yourself. It's not, you can't just walk in and say, give me hormones, or, you don't walk in and they say, here you go, take hormones. They make sure it's what's best for you. And they're very sure to tell you all the risks and side effects. So I'm not sure where she gets this idea from, honestly. So she's basically calling transgender treatment conversion therapy for gay people. Once again, going back to this idea that, for some reason gay people are being forced to transition. It's not conversion therapy. You've got to fight to get these services. You're not going to fight for them if you're being converted. It's just bizarre, this idea that she thinks that it's just being forced on people. It's really not the case. I can talk from experience. She gives an example about someone from the Tavistock Clinic in the UK talking about transitions driven by homophobia. I haven't watched the video. I might just watch at the end and let you know what I think of that. I just want to point out that if some people are transitioning when they're actually gay and it's due to homophobia, I think that could just be helped with better funding for trans services. That way, if there's better qualified staff and professionals, they can better pick up on these things. So essentially, just better trans healthcare, please. I'll be happy with that too. She says transition might be right for some, but not others, and points at detransitioners. And as I pointed out in my video, detransitioning is a very, very small percentage of trans people. So the study I looked at was about gender-affirming surgeries, which are obviously irreversible surgeries. With hormones, there's kind of a period where it can be reversible. For example, if I went off hormones now, I would probably not have any lasting side effects. Maybe I might retain some breast tissue. But in terms of kind of things that are irreversible, it's more so for people who are born a fab. growing facial hair, voice dropping. Those are irreversible changes. However, you can still train your voice to be higher if your voice is dropped. I've done that. And there's things like electrolysis. There are cis women who do have deeper voices and facial hair. So although if you are a cis woman and you have those things, it can be difficult. I understand that, especially if you've detransitioned because you've realised you weren't actually trans. I can imagine that's very difficult. But once again, I think better trans healthcare could help these people realise they weren't trans. I want to point out that, as I said, from my experience, it's very difficult to get access to treatment. And you're made very aware of what happens when you take hormones or if you even go into surgery. So, if you're an adult and you make those decisions and you do regret them, only so much of people making sure that you seem confident in yourself will do. If you're so confident and then you come to regret it, unfortunately you've made that decision. But for all the trans people who've made that decision, there's so many more. The vast majority are happy with the treatment they receive, or I just kind of wish it was better treatment, to be honest. I know that's something that sometimes the treatment doesn't live up to what people expect, which I know is something which can trigger some people to detransition because they're not able to live how they want to, which is really unfortunate. She talks about here antidepressants being overprescribed to teenagers. I agree with the idea that I think that antidepressants are quite easily prescribed these days. I think they're definitely really helpful for a lot of people, though. I don't know any kind of facts about how overprescribed they are, but that is not the case with hormone treatment, for example. As I said, I'm repeating myself now, but it's not overprescribed because you've got to fight for it. She talks about the long-term health risks of cross-sex hormones. She links to a study which I think talks about, it talks about cardiovascular disease. And this is, once again, something that is pointed out to you by, what should be at least pointed out to you by the person who's administering the hormones. They should tell you that all the side effects and potential health risks. I'm very aware of the cardiovascular concerns. I try and eat a bit healthier to combat that.
Muffins.
Just a plug for veganism here. If you eat a whole foods plant-based diet, it is the only diet shown to reverse heart disease. So if you follow a healthy plant-based diet, basically, the chances of you getting cardiovascular disease are very low, whether you're taking hormones or not. So something to consider. So some academic saying the off-label use of puberty blockers for under 18s as a unregulated live experiment on children. There are lots of studies on puberty blockers that have taken place, and as far as we know, they are safe. They're irreversible. Once you take someone off puberty blockers, they will go through their natural puberty. There's nothing irreversible about puberty blockers. It just stops someone going through a puberty that they don't want to go through. I can say now, if I had access to puberty blockers, if someone said you can have puberty blockers, and that way, you can decide later whether you want to go through your natural puberty or take estrogen later on, I would have jumped at that chance. Giving me more time to decide what's best for me, not having to go through a masculine puberty, having to grow facial hair, having to have my voice drop and then having to train that then to be higher. There's so many other things as well. Puberty, if you go through the wrong puberty, it can wreck your body, and it's horrible, particularly if you go through puberty with testosterone. The changes are very, but they're irreversible, and forcing someone to go through a puberty they don't want to go through is really horrible. Giving them time to think, something which is irreversible, is brilliant. As I mentioned in my previous video, it's just the idea of think of the children. It's what homophobes have been saying about gay people for ages now. It's just a load of bollocks. Okay, so I finished going through her list of tweets now. I'm going to watch that video and I will tell you what I think of it.
And they say that some parents appear to prefer their child was transgender and straight rather than gay, pushing them towards transition.
So first of all, just about the children who are gay then transitioning, thinking they're trans. From what they've said so far, it just seems to be that parents would rather their child be trans than gay. That's more of an issue with the parents than the child saying it. Once again, need to listen to the people themselves rather than their parents. I'll continue watching to see if anything else comes up.
Maybe we are medicating gay kids, maybe we're medicating kids with autism, maybe we are medicating traumatised children. And if we are, we're doing bad things to these vulnerable kids.
Here we have a clinician saying it's bad to give medical treatment to help a child with autism transition. As I mentioned in my previous video about J.K. Rowling's essay, you can be trans and be autistic at the same time. Just because you're autistic doesn't mean you're not trans. The fact that a clinician has said this is just mind-blowing to me. Like, if someone were to say to me, oh, you can't be trans, you're autistic, so that means you couldn't possibly be trans, it's just your autism. No, like, my autism and my gender are two separate things. It just frustrates me so much. Someone who's meant to be a clinician apparently doesn't understand autistic people, and that is concerning.
Huge changes for this young person. You know, it could lead to potentially infertility and so on.
Here they're calling puberty blockers life-changing medicine. Once again, they just pause puberty. If you take someone off puberty blockers, they go through their natural puberty. I think it's very misleading to call them life-changing. They have life-changing consequences, including this idea of infertility, which isn't substantiated in the evidence.
We did have a lot of families and parents who would actively tell us that, oh, I'm so glad at least my child is not gay or lesbian, implying that having a trans outcome would be better for their children.
The young person had very clearly told me and my colleague that my mum wants the hormone more than I do.
So once again, talking about the homophobia pushing people to transition, once again, there was a lot of focus on parents saying they'd rather their child be trans than gay, which once again is not listening to the child themselves and their own experiences, which I agree is poor practice. You shouldn't do what the parents want, you should listen to the patient themselves. There's a particular case where they said they brought this up, when the clinicians brought this up, and were told to refer the child anyway, even though the child had told them that, their parents wanted the hormones more than they did. I think that's bad practice. That's not been my experience of trans healthcare, but you definitely need better trans healthcare you're listening to parents more than you're listening to the children, the patients themselves.
I kept saying to her, are we hurting children? And she did not say no. She was not able to say to me, it's fine. We are not hurting the children.
If this is true, what they're saying, then this is a serious issue with this service. I haven't been to the Tavistock clinic, so I can't speak from experience. I think one of the ways this could be improved is better funding for trans services. I know that trans services, like the whole of the NHS, are getting less and less funding, and people aren't able to do their jobs if they don't have enough qualified staff or don't have the funding they need. It's once again, it's not an issue with trans people or trans activists. This is an issue with not properly funded trans services.
The Trust added that the majority of patients using the service will not be referred to an endocrinology service for consideration for hormone-blocking drugs.
So she said there that most of the people referred to Tavistock don't see an endocrinologist to get puberty blockers, which was how I understood the service worked. It's not like everyone who goes there goes on to get puberty blockers. Yes, there might potentially be some issues if those whistleblowers are telling the truth. Then yes, it sounds like there are some issues, although some of them definitely didn't seem to understand things like autism. I think that piece was really alarmist, and it seems to be kind of invoking a moral panic about trans children, which is also what J.K. Rowling's been doing, making it seem like all these children are at risk. I'd like to point out once again, it's really difficult to access these services, and the majority of people who do receive treatment don't experience regrets or don't detransition. So it's not as alarming as they make out to be. I always think that kind of improving these services is a good thing, of course. Once again, I think that's just a matter of increasing funding, getting better qualified people there. I'm really concerned that the government is going to make it more difficult to gain access to trans healthcare and reduce the funding for these services, which seems to be something that Liz Truss's statement, which I mentioned in my first video about transphobia and Breath of the Wild. It seems that she wants to kind of reduce the amount of people who are receiving treatment, which is really concerning and makes me very worried. I said, once again, the amount of people who detransition or wrongly administered hormones is very minute, and a better service would make this an even smaller number. I hope you enjoyed that video. It was a bit different from what I normally do. It wasn't scripted, I was just going off of what J.K. Rowling has said. I hope you can see that although it seems very alarming what J.K. Rowling says and what's said in the video she shared, it's really not as big of a pandemic of detransitioning and people wrongly being forced into transition as they'd like you to believe. It's definitely something which I would love to see be an even smaller percentage of people detransitioning. But once again, better treatment, more funding for these services is what's needed, not creating this fear of trans people and trans activists. And obviously J.K. Rowling is just transphobic herself, which I mentioned in my previous video and hopefully seen here. So listening to what she thinks about trans issues is not the way to go forward. Anyway, I hope you all have a bodacious day. Take care. Peace. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you like the style of this video, then let me know and I can do more like this. I enjoyed replying directly to the comments, but if you're not a fan, then I'll go back to my normal style of videos. Anyway, take care. I've completely forgotten what I was saying.